can you exist in a language you were not meant to speak in, but be spoken about? When you grow up with different languages, you always walk between worlds. And to me, it felt like I was carrying a bucket of water and trying to carry it onto the other side. And then you stumble and you fall. And by the end, you're happy if a little tiny drop has made it to the other side. And sometimes you realize you're suffocating within a language because you were not meant to speak in this language. You were merely one of those people to be spoken about. And those are the moments when you realize the language you are supposed to call your home, the language that you are most at home in, is not your home. To explain the impact of language and how it can turn into cages, I always use the metaphor of the Museum of Language. In this Museum of Language, you can find all the things you know from the outside world. Faraway places, near places, different ideas and ideologies, concepts and colours and tastes. And without ever leaving this building, you can travel through time and space. You can explore all these things. In this Museum of Language, there are two types of people. The first type are the unlabeled. Those people fit the norm within that society to a degree, the standard of that society to a degree, that they don't need to be labelled. These people can move through this Museum of Language freely and explore all of the things I've just listed. They never run against the walls within this Museum of Language. They never wonder about the things missing in the Museum of Language, because those who have curated this Museum of Language are also unlabeled. The privilege of the unlabeled becomes even more visible when we look at the second type of people in this Museum of Language, the labeled. These are a group of people who don't fit the norm and standard within that society. They are in one way or another different. The unlabeled now want to understand the labeled. However, not as individuals, but as a whole, as a category. And this category, this label, builds a glass cage in the Museum of Language. And then they also give them a definition based on what they find interesting and remarkable, but they don't fit the category, the definition they've been given. So they run against the glass cage walls. But that causes pain, so they retrieve and now walk at maximum distance to the edges of the definition, to the edges of who they're supposed to be. And this is how they degenerate into caricatures of themselves, into stereotypes. Others, however, keep walking against those glass cage walls again and again and again. They start to create cracks. They are almost able to breathe in the air of freedom. Their foreheads start bleeding when the inspection starts. The unlabeled want to understand why this person, this labeled person, doesn't fit their category. So they start to inspect this person. The texture of their skin, your hair, the way you live and love, and all of the aspects of your being are being scrutinized and analyzed. And these people allow this humiliating process to happen because they believe at the end of the scrutiny they will be allowed to walk freely. However, they are not being granted freedom, but are now introduced into a slightly larger glass cage in the Museum of Language. And some, in this new, slightly larger glass cage, are happy, and others, on their first day, walk against those glass cage walls. No language captures the whole world in all its beauty, its facets, and all the experiences that take place within a society. Each language captures only as much as the most powerful within a society have expressed and poured into words, into the language. And you can see this most beautifully, but also most drastically when you look into the injustices that happen within a society. So, for example, in the 60s, there was no widespread word in the US for sexual harassment. Back then, at a workplace, for instance, if a woman was sexually harassed by her boss, she on the one hand, was unable to name what she had experienced because it was either a flirt, hence not a problem, or there had to be some violent act for others to recognize that there is a problem. The perpetrator, on the other hand, wasn't even aware of having done anything wrong. Because of this linguistic gap, he profited and didn't have to reflect on what he did and what was happening. It was only when this word became more widespread that more people were able to see and name an injustice within society to then discuss it and problematize it. This is a good example to show how powerful language is, that the lack of words within a language are not just mere lacks or gaps, that these are political. James Baldwin, an Afro-American writer, a homosexual writer, was discussing his difficult relationship to the English language. He was discussing how you can exist in a language you are not meant to exist in, speak in. And he says, yes, it may be the fault of the language that it doesn't carry the weight of your experiences, that it doesn't reflect your experiences. But he says, maybe it's also my fault. Because I've never learned to use language, but only learned to imitate it. Maybe if we brought up the courage to put on the weight of our experiences into the language, if we did that work, it might be able to encompass us. Only then we will be able to enter the building of language, the structures of a society, and dare to work on them. Not simply be guests who only take as much space as they are granted, but understand that we do have the ability to tear down walls, that these languages are ours. Only then society will transform, and only then we will be able to be part of transformation.
Human.